Have you ever wondered why they always seem to come back, right when you're finally getting over them? It's like clockwork. You've cried the tears, had the sleepless nights, questioned your worth, and finally started to breathe again. You're no longer checking your phone, hoping to see their name pop up. You've pulled your focus back to yourself, started smiling again, genuinely. And then, like a bad plot twist in a movie you thought you finished, they show up, out of nowhere, with a, "Hey, I've been thinking about you." Why does this always happen? Why do people who walked away, who made the choice to leave, suddenly reappear when you're finally stepping into your power? Let's break a popular myth right now. They don't come back because they love you. That's what we want to believe, that they've finally realized what they lost, that maybe the love was real all along. But if that were true, why didn't they show up when you needed them most? Why now, after you've done the hard work of letting go? Here's the truth most people don't talk about. Their return is rarely about love. It's about control, ego, and fear. And this isn't just relationship drama. It's a pattern rooted in deep psychological behavior, and it's one that Stoicism, yes, that ancient yet intensely relevant philosophy, can help us understand and overcome. In Stoic Relationships, the goal isn't just to love wisely, but to protect your peace ruthlessly, to learn to walk away from manipulation and illusions disguised as love. This video will pull back the curtain on the real reasons they come back. When you move on, we're not here to vent, we're here to understand, to reclaim power, and to stand firmly in the truth of who we are. And trust me, once you see these reasons clearly, you won't see their return the same way again. You'll realize this isn't about you being someone they miss. It's about them fearing who you're becoming without them. We'll expose 6 uncomfortable but liberating truths that reveal why they return, and more importantly, how you can respond like the highest version of yourself, with composure, with clarity, with control. You'll learn how to protect your peace and never fall into their emotional traps again. This isn't just about relationships, it's about transformation, about stoicism in action. So stay with me, because the deeper we go, the stronger you become. And wait until we get to the final point. It's the one that hits hardest, the one that will change the way you see the entire story. Ready? Let's begin. 1. They never expected you to be fine without them. They left thinking they held the final word in your story, believing that their absence would echo through your days like a permanent shadow. They assumed you would wait, that you would linger in the memory of what was, holding space in your heart like a shrine to something that once felt eternal. But what they never counted on, what truly disrupts the narrative they built in their minds, is the reality that you not only survived without them, you flourished. In Stoic Relationships, we understand that attachment isn't love, and detachment isn't loss, it's liberation. When they walked away, they imagined a version of you that would unravel, that would cling to the pieces they left behind. They imagined you checking your phone every night, rereading old conversations, torturing yourself with what-ifs and maybes. But what actually happened? You got tired. Tired of the confusion, tired of the inconsistency, tired of the emotional limbo they placed you in. And in that exhaustion, something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a fog lifting. You began to see clearly, perhaps for the first time, and in that clarity, you chose yourself. That choice is the most unexpected plot twist for them. You see, when someone assumes they are the center of your emotional universe, they build their confidence on your loyalty, not realizing that loyalty isn't infinite when it isn't reciprocated. Their confidence was fed by your presence, your patience, your hope. And when those things disappeared, they were left with the truth. They never had the power. They only had access. Stoicism teaches us to master our inner world, and when you applied that to your healing, it was revolutionary. You stopped checking for them. You stopped letting their silence define your worth. You stopped trying to decode mixed signals or hold on to someone who didn't have the courage to choose you. And the moment you stopped doing those things was the moment you became dangerous in their eyes. Not because you turned cold, but because you turned inward. You began building instead of begging. You found peace in the silence, strength in the solitude, and purpose in the pause. That's when they felt it, that energetic shift. That invisible thread that once tethered you to them snapped, not out of rage, not out of bitterness, but out of growth. And the irony, that's when they started to miss you. But here's the thing, they're not missing you. They're missing the version of themselves they felt like in your presence. They miss being needed. They miss being the reason behind your smile, the subject of your attention, the comfort in your chaos. But in truth, that comfort was conditional. It depended on your willingness to accept less than you deserved. And now that you've raised your standards, they feel exposed. Because it's not just that you moved on, it's that you did it without making noise. You didn't send them angry messages. You didn't try to win them back. You simply stopped showing up. And that silence, it's deafening. It forces them to face what they never considered, that maybe they weren't as irreplaceable as they thought, that maybe, just maybe, they were never as essential to your healing as they assumed. In Stoic relationships, healing is not about erasing memories. It's about transforming the meaning of those memories. You didn't forget them. You simply stopped allowing those memories to dictate your self-worth. You began to view your past through a lens of wisdom rather than weakness. You realize that just because someone was part of your story doesn't mean they get to stay in the next chapter. And that realization, that inner revolution, is what they never expected. They imagined you broken. They imagined you bitter. They imagined you still looking for closure in all the wrong places. But instead you built boundaries. You protected your energy. You honored your emotions, not by suppressing them, but by listening to them without letting them rule you. And that inner shift, it terrified them. Because now, when they look back, they're not seeing someone who's desperate for validation. They're seeing someone who discovered their value independently, someone who doesn't chase what walks away, someone who doesn't confuse attention with affection, someone who learned through the painful yet necessary process of detachment that real power comes from within. So they come back, not because they've changed, but because they can't reconcile the version of you who no longer needs them. They want the old version of you, the one who would drop everything at the first sign of their return, the one who would rationalize their neglect, excuse their silence, and believe their words without requiring their actions to match. But that version of you no longer exists. Stoicism has taught you that freedom is earned through discipline, and you've applied that to your heart. You no longer hand out access to your energy just because someone once had it. You evaluate, you protect, you choose based on character, not chemistry. And that discernment, that elevated standard, is something they didn't anticipate, because it means they're no longer the exception to your rules. They're now just another person who either meets your standards or doesn't. They're not special simply because they're familiar. They don't get a free pass because of history. And the most painful part for them, you didn't need revenge. You didn't need to make a scene. Your healing was enough. Your silence was enough. Your glow-up, emotional, spiritual, even physical, was enough. It spoke for you. It told the world and them that you're no longer available to be mistreated. And now they don't know how to approach you. The same tactics don't work. The same words feel empty. The same presence that once brought you comfort now feels foreign. Because you've changed. Not superficially, but fundamentally. They're hoping to step back into the role they once played, not realizing the script has changed and they were written out. Not because you're heartless, but because you finally understood that your peace is non-negotiable. In Stoic relationships, We learn that suffering often comes from our expectations, not reality. And once you let go of the expectation that they would return with remorse and transformation, you set yourself free. That freedom, that fierce inner clarity, is something they can feel, even if they never say it. They feel it in your tone, in your boundaries, in your absence. And that absence, make no mistake, is loud. It's louder than any words you could have said, because it reflects something they never believed would happen, that you realized your life doesn't revolve around their presence, that your happiness was never theirs to give or take, that your story continues stronger and wiser, with or without them. So now they stand on the outside looking in, wondering how you became this version of yourself, wondering how you stopped needing them, wondering if they ever truly mattered. And that wondering, that quiet, aching curiosity, is their lesson. To learn, not your burden to carry. You're not here to validate their regrets. You're not here to soften the blow of their own choices. You're here to live fully and fearlessly, to protect your energy, to choose yourself again and again without apology. Because now you understand what they never did, that peace is more precious than potential, that presence is more powerful than promises, and that self-worth, once discovered, is not something you ever give away again. Let them wonder, let them question, let them feel the weight of their absence. Because the strongest thing you can ever do in the face of someone who once underestimated you is thrive quietly, relentlessly, unapologetically. 2, they want what they can no longer have. There's something magnetic about absence, something quietly powerful about pulling away without a fight. You've likely noticed that the less you engage, the more curious they become. The quieter you get, the louder their attempts to reclaim. Your attention grow. This isn't coincidence. It's human psychology. People are drawn to what they can't easily possess, to what doesn't immediately respond, to what doesn't bend to their whims. And when it comes to relationships, this behavior is magnified. When you stop chasing, when you finally let go of the fantasy and begin to live with clarity, you disrupt the dynamic they had grown comfortable with. They wanted you to stay predictable, emotionally available on demand, waiting, wondering, wanting. But Stoicism teaches us that emotional restraint is strength, not a weakness, that not everything you feel deserves a reaction. And so, as you embraced this discipline, you became the kind of person who no longer sends paragraphs to silence, who no longer explains your worth to the unready, who no longer attaches value to someone just because they once mattered. That shift wasn't just personal, it was powerful, because now, from their vantage point, you are no longer accessible. And that stings, because the truth is, they never thought you'd really move on. They assumed their name still echoed in your mind, that some part of you still held space, still left the door ajar. But then the messages stopped. The likes disappeared, the patterns broke, and they were left not with your attention but with the absence of it. In Stoic Relationships, we train ourselves to value silence not as a weapon, but as a boundary. You didn't ghost out of spite. You withdrew out of self-respect. You recognized that someone who doesn't see your value when you're right in front of them doesn't deserve access once you've walked away. And that realization is what they feel most. It's not your anger, it's your indifference. They crave what they once dismissed. They remember the version of you who showed up no matter what, the one who answered late-night texts, forgave, unspoken apologies, and hoped endlessly. But now, that version has evolved, and they are faced with a reality they didn't prepare for. You've become the thing they can't have. Not because you're playing games, but because you're no longer playing the same game at all. You're not trying to win them back. You're not strategizing to provoke a response. You've removed them from the equation of your self-worth entirely. That move, that inward shift, triggers something deeper than nostalgia. It provokes panic, because people often don't realize how much control they believed they had until it's gone. When they were inconsistent, they knew you'd stay. When they were silent, they assumed you'd speak. When they pulled away, they expected you to chase, and now they're left chasing a ghost of someone who no longer exists in the same form. What they want now is no longer you. It's the comfort of control. The ease of knowing someone would always pick up, always forgive, always wait. But now that comfort has vanished, and what's left is discomfort. Discomfort in seeing you thrive. Discomfort in knowing they no longer occupy your mental space. Discomfort in realizing that their presence wasn't as essential as they once believed. Stoicism invites us to confront desire with discernment, to recognize when what we want is not a person, but a feeling we associate with them. And they are no different. They don't miss your love, they miss how it made them feel. They don't long for connection. They long for the reflection of their worth they saw in your eyes. And that's why your distance is so disruptive. It forces them to see themselves without your praise, without your devotion, without the pedestal you once placed them on. They are not used to this version of reality where they are no longer the protagonist in your story. That shift in narrative, where you've reclaimed the pen and rewritten the plot, is what they are reacting to. But here's the crucial point. Just because they want you now doesn't mean they value you. Wanting and valuing are not the same. People often want the things they believe they've lost control over, not because they recognize their worth, but because they're driven by ego and scarcity. And when someone's interest in you increases only when your interest decreases, that's not love. That's possession. In Stoic relationships, we learn to differentiate between genuine love and conditional desire. One requires growth, the other feeds on absence. And this distinction is everything, because now, when they circle back with messages, gestures, or curiosity, you're not swayed. You don't misinterpret presence for progress. You don't confuse effort with intention. You understand that regret is not the same as accountability, that attention is not the same as action. And so, you don't lower your standards for nostalgia. You don't dilute your peace for past connection. You've tasted emotional sovereignty, and you're not willing to give that up for breadcrumbs of affection. This is what they never expected, that you'd actually evolve. That you'd use the pain as fuel, that you'd outgrow the spaces that once confined you. And because they didn't anticipate your healing, they are now trying to reverse a process that was never meant to accommodate their return. They're reaching back into a past that no longer welcomes them, hoping to recreate a version of you that only existed when you didn't know better. But now you do. And that knowing, that inner certainty is your shield. They are left grappling with a door that's no longer open, a connection that's no longer active, a version of you that no longer exists. And what hurts most isn't your absence, it's your evolution. They can't reach you anymore, not because you're hiding, but because you're elevated. You've become grounded in truth, and that truth is unshakable. You know your worth isn't measured by who comes back. It's reflected in who you don't allow back in. And if that truth resonates with you, let it echo beyond this video, like this moment if you feel it. Comment number 1 below if you've ever experienced someone returning only when you finally moved on. And don't forget to subscribe if you're on a journey of reclaiming your peace, your power, and your purpose. This space is for you. Space of clarity, strength, and stoic relationships that don't drain you but elevate you. Let's grow stronger together. 3. They seek validation, not reconnection. It's tempting to believe their return means they've realized something deep, something transformative, something romantic, that maybe time has opened their eyes, softened their ego, expanded their heart, that maybe now, finally, they're ready to give what they couldn't before. But pause. Ask yourself, what are they really doing here? What have they shown beyond their sudden reappearance to prove this is about love and not something else entirely? Most people don't come back to rebuild. They come back to check if the door is still unlocked. They come back to see if you'll still answer, if you'll still feel, if you're still emotionally available. Because when someone leaves and then returns without explanation, without growth, without effort, they're not reaching out for connection, they're reaching out for confirmation. Confirmation that they still matter, that they can still stir something in you, that your heart still beats a little faster at the sound of their voice. And when they feel that, even for a moment, it soothes them, not because they care about you, but because it reminds them of the power they once held. In Stoic relationships, we're trained to see beyond appearances. We look at motives, not just movements, and the motive here is ego, not intimacy. Most of the time, they aren't interested in starting over. They're interested in testing the waters. They want to know that no matter how long it's been, no matter what they've done, no matter how they left, you'll still let them in. That you'll still drop what you're doing to make space for them. This isn't about you, it's about them, their need for reassurance, their need for validation, their need to prove to themselves that they still have emotional leverage over you. And when you respond, when you answer, when you show that you still care in some way, it gives them a sense of relief. Not because they're thinking about a future with you, but because they hate the idea of being forgotten. They hate the idea that you've closed the chapter. They hate the idea that they no longer influence your emotional state. This isn't about missing the relationship. It's about missing the role they played in your life. They want to know that if they wanted to, they could still come back. That if they chose to, they could still win you over. That if they wanted your attention again, it would still be there waiting. But that isn't love, that's a power trip. It's a need to prove their desirability, their worth, their hold over you. And when you see it through the lens of Stoicism, it becomes painfully clear. Love doesn't test. It doesn't provoke just to see how you'll respond. It doesn't drop breadcrumbs in your path, hoping you'll pick them up and follow. Love is clear. Love is consistent. Love shows up with effort, with humility, with genuine interest in building something real. What they're doing is not that. What they're doing is reaching out because their confidence has cracked, because they saw you glowing on social media, because they heard about your progress, your peace, your new beginning, because they caught wind that you're no longer stuck in the past. And that scares them. Because if you've moved on, it means they've lost their spot. It means they're no longer in control. It means they've become just another character in your story, not the central one. So they return, not to offer a new chapter, but to see if there's still a headline in your mind. And if you let them in, even a little, it validates them. It tells them they still matter, that they can still cause a ripple in your calm, that they still live somewhere in your emotional space. But once they get that feeling, many of them disappear again. Because they weren't there to stay. They were there to soothe a bruise on their ego. They were there to prove that they're still wanted. And once that itch is scratched, they retreat, leaving you with the aftermath. Again. This is why it's so critical to stay grounded, to not mistake contact for commitment, to not confuse curiosity for care. When someone reaches out after hurting you, disappearing, or treating you like an option, your first instinct should not be excitement. It should be discernment. What are they really doing here? What are they showing with their actions? Not just their words. Are they taking accountability? Are they showing up with consistency? Are they willing to rebuild trust? Or are they just saying, hey, hoping that one little word will reignite something in you that gives them comfort? Stoicism teaches that your peace is too valuable to gamble on uncertainty, that emotional clarity is worth protecting at all costs. You don't need to prove you've moved on by entertaining the past. Your silence says everything. Your lack of response is more powerful than a perfectly worded message. Your refusal to be a testing ground for someone else's insecurity is a testament to your growth. Let them wonder. Let them sit with their uncertainty. Let them feel what they once made you feel, confused, unsure, unsteady. Because now the tables have turned, not out of vengeance, but out of evolution. You've built something stable inside, yourself. And that stability no longer makes space for someone who only reaches out when they need to feel important. This is the difference between healing and hoping. Hope waits for the past to return. Healing prepares you for what's ahead. You've done the work. You've stayed up late questioning your worth. You've sat in the silence. You've carried the weight of what they did and found a way to breathe through it. You don't owe them access just because they want to feel better about themselves. That's not your job. You're not a mirror for their insecurities. You're not a therapist for their emotional confusion. You're not a pit stop in their journey to self-discovery. You are your own sanctuary. And in Stoic relationships, sanctuaries aren't open to tourists. They're protected, cherished, respected. So when they pop up with a casual, "How have you been?" or a sudden wave emoji or a random reaction to your story, remember what it is: a test, a probe, a way to measure how much of your heart they still hold. And when you feel that pull to respond, stop and ask, do I want to answer because I miss them, or because I miss the feeling of being wanted? Am I responding from a place of wholeness or from a place of old habit? That's where the true strength lies, not in denying your feelings, but in understanding them. You can care about someone and still choose not to reopen the door. You can feel the urge to reply and still decide that your peace matters more, because it does, every time. And the more you practice this, the easier it gets. The less you seek closure from someone who was never open, the less you need validation from someone who didn't value you. You become your own anchor, your own affirmation, your own peace. That's the heart of Stoicism, to master the self so deeply that nothing external can shake your inner world. And when you live from that place, their games lose all meaning. Their attempts at validation fall flat. Their need for attention no longer holds power. You see them clearly, not as the love of your life, but as the lesson you needed. A lesson in boundaries, a lesson in self-worth, a lesson in recognizing the difference between someone who wants to build a future with you and someone who just wants to know they still could. That lesson, once learned, becomes armor, not a wall to keep love out, but a filter to keep harm away. And through it, you begin to attract a different kind of energy. People who don't need to test you to know your value. People who show up, not because they're curious, but because they're clear. That's the kind of connection worth waiting for. That's what happens when you stop letting people use your heart as a place to store their insecurities. You reclaim your space, you reclaim your time, you reclaim your story. So the next time they reach out, remember, if it's about validation, it's not about love. And you, of all people, deserve more than being someone's emotional safety net. 4. They fear losing the identity you reflected back to them. When they walked away, they didn't just leave a relationship. They left behind the version of themselves they had grown used to seeing through your eyes. And this is what most people fail to understand. Sometimes people don't come back because they miss who you were to them. They come back because they miss who they were when they were with you. You offered them something more than love. You offered them a mirror, a place where they could see the best version of themselves, reflected back without judgment. You saw their potential, you believed in their goodness, you forgave their flaws and held space for their growth. In your presence, they felt like someone important, someone worthy, someone wanted. And when they lost that reflection, they didn't just lose you, they lost access to that identity. In Stoic relationships, we know that our sense of self should never rely on how others perceive us. Yet for many, the validation they receive from being adored becomes a pillar of their self-worth. So when you detach, When you stop admiring them, stop responding, stop caring, you do more than create distance. You strip away the illusion. And that terrifies them. Because in your absence, they're forced to confront a version of themselves that doesn't feel as powerful, as praised, or as admired. You were the one who made them feel special. Not because they were flawless, but because you gave them the benefit of the doubt, time and time again. You held them in high regard, even when their actions didn't fully deserve it. And now that you're gone, that pedestal is empty, and they know deep down no one else will ever see them the way you did. That level of trust, that depth of connection, that unconditional acceptance, they won't find it in the casual flings or half-hearted conversations they try to use as a replacement. And this realization doesn't dawn on them all at once. It creeps in slowly, like a shadow that grows longer the further they walk from your light. At first, they may pretend they're fine. They may post pictures, date around, act unbothered. But over time, when the echo of your presence fades, they begin to miss the reflection of themselves they saw in your world. Because it wasn't just about being loved. It was about who they got to be while being loved by you. And once that's gone, they start to question everything. Who am I without their admiration? Who am I without the version of myself that felt whole in their presence? That identity, the one propped up by your attention, your affirmation, your energy, starts to erode. And as it fades, insecurity grows. That's when they come back. Not out of clarity or change, but out of identity crisis. They hope that by returning to you, they can resurrect the image they lost, that they can once again feel like the person they were when they were the center of your world. But this is where the shift in power becomes undeniable, because you're no longer playing the same role. You don't see them through those rose-colored glasses anymore. You've taken them off, cleaned the lens, and now you see them as they are, not as you hoped they would be. And that is what they can't handle. They fear being seen without the filter of your affection. They fear being ordinary in your eyes, because your love made them feel extraordinary, even when they didn't live up to it. And now that your love has evolved into self-love, they no longer have access to that special version of themselves. You've grown, you've healed, you've stopped idealizing them and started prioritizing you. In Stoic relationships, we learn that our value does not depend on who we hold up. It depends on who we become in the process. And you've become someone who no longer needs to create potential in others just to justify staying. You no longer fall for charm without character, presence without consistency, or apologies without change. And they feel that shift. Not because you've said anything, but because your energy no longer mirrors their ego. They can no longer look to you for the praise they once depended on. You're not playing the role of cheerleader or emotional caretaker anymore. You've reclaimed your power, and that power threatens their sense of identity. That's the thing about people who build their confidence on someone else's validation. They're lost when that validation is removed. And instead of doing the inner work, they often try to return to the source. But they're not returning to you. They're returning to the version of themselves they were when they felt important to you. And the moment they realize that version is gone, that you're no longer willing to inflate their ego at the expense of your own peace, is the moment the fantasy begins to crumble. They aren't just mourning the loss of the relationship. They're mourning the loss of control, of admiration, of being adored without earning it. Because now they would have to earn it. They'd have to prove they've grown, take accountability, show up with integrity. And for many, that's too heavy a price to pay. So they resort to subtle tactics instead. A like, a DM, a vague message, a breadcrumb, not a blueprint, hoping it will trigger something familiar in you, hoping you'll fall back into the rhythm of giving more than you receive. But this time, you don't. You don't rush to respond. You don't over-explain your silence. You don't offer them a front-row seat to your healing. Because you understand now that someone who truly values you won't need reminders of how worthy you are. They'll already know. And if they don't, they're not meant to be in your inner circle. You've grown too wise to be used as a mirror for someone else's fragile sense of self. You've learned to be your own reflection, to see your strength, your growth, your worth, not through someone else's admiration, but through your own awareness. That's the essence of Stoicism, to derive confidence from within, not from applause. And that's what terrifies them. They no longer have access to the version of you who needed their validation. They no longer get to feel important just because you once made them feel that way. Now they have to face the version of you who is whole without them, who has found peace in their absence, who sees them clearly, not cruelly, but truthfully. And the truth is, they haven't changed. They've just lost the mirror. And that loss hits deeper than they expected. Because for the first time, they're not just dealing with rejection, they're dealing with irrelevance. And that's a wound their ego doesn't know how to heal. If this message resonates with your journey, if you've seen this dynamic play out in your own life, then let it be a moment of strength. Like this video, if it spoke to your experience. Drop a number 1 in the comments if you've ever realized someone only wanted you back to restore their own identity. And hit that subscribe button if you're choosing self-worth, peace, and growth over emotional recycling. Together, we're building a space where Stoic relationships aren't a rarity, they're the standard. Let's keep going. 5. They are driven by the loss of control. Control is a silent addiction in many relationships, subtle, unspoken, and often disguised as affection or attention. But when it's gone, its absence is loud, deafening even. You might not have realized it at first, but much of what they did was not about connection. It was about control. They weren't trying to build a future together. They were trying to shape your present emotions. They pulled away to see if you'd chase. They went silent to see if you'd reach out. They tested boundaries, not because they didn't know them, but because they wanted to see if you'd still let them through. And every time you responded, forgave, stayed, you fed that control. Not because you were weak, but because you cared. Because love teaches us to be patient, to see the best in others, to hold space when someone is struggling. But there comes a point where care becomes self-abandonment, where forgiveness becomes a loop, where staying becomes sacrificing your own peace. And the moment you realize that, everything changed. You stopped reacting. You stopped reaching out. You stopped letting your emotions be dictated by their behavior. And that's when the panic set in for them. Because people who thrive on control don't fear your love ending. They fear their power ending. They don't miss the relationship. They miss the influence. They miss the way you used to respond immediately, the way you'd pour yourself into explanations, the way you'd do the emotional labor while they drifted in and out at will. And now, none of that works. Your silence says more than your words ever could. Your distance feels like rejection, even if you've said nothing at all. Because for someone used to pulling the strings, the moment you cut them, the illusion of control disappears, and with it, their sense of superiority. In Stoic relationships, control is never the goal. Mutual respect is. Emotional sovereignty is, and you've stepped into that now. You no longer feel the need to explain your peace. You no longer apologize for protecting your boundaries. You no longer feel guilt for choosing stillness over chaos. That stability, the one you've cultivated, with effort, pain, and practice, makes you untouchable to someone who once depended on your instability to feel powerful. They're not coming back because they miss your laugh or your soul or your company. They're coming back because they feel powerless without your reaction. They come back to see if the old dynamics still apply. Will you still melt at their words? Will you still drop everything at the sign of their return? Will you still play the role they wrote for you? Patient, forgiving, emotionally available on demand? But you don't, because you're no longer the same. And that loss of control eats at them in ways they can't articulate. It creates an ache they don't know how to soothe, because it's not about you, it's about what they can't do to you anymore. That is what fuels their return. It's not curiosity, it's not love, it's not even closure. It's an attempt to reclaim control over a story that no longer belongs to them. And when they find you calm, unmoved, indifferent, it unravels their narrative. You were supposed to be waiting. You were supposed to be vulnerable. You were supposed to be hoping. But instead, you've become composed, grounded, and unreachable, not because you're hiding, but because you're healed. And healed people don't play the same games. They don't re-enter patterns they've worked so hard to break. They don't hand their emotional keys back to the person who once locked them in confusion. This is where the foundation of Stoicism becomes essential. You learn to detach not because you don't care, but because you care about your peace more. You recognize that love without respect is manipulation, that closeness without consistency is chaos, that attention without intention is a trap. And so, when they try to return, you don't get swept up. You observe, you discern, you choose, based on alignment, not attachment. Because you've broken the spell, and now you see clearly. Their desire to reconnect has less to do with who you are and more to do with who they used to be when they felt in control. And now that they're not, they're grasping, trying to re-establish the upper hand, trying to insert themselves into your new chapter, hoping to stir up just enough emotion to prove they still matter. But what they don't understand is that your peace is no longer for sale. You've paid for it, in tears, in therapy, in long nights of self-reflection. And now it's yours, non-negotiable, untouchable. And when someone returns not with humility, but with the expectation that things will go back to how they were, that's the clearest sign they haven't changed. They're just uncomfortable being powerless. Because in your absence, they've had to face themselves. They've had to sit in the silence they once imposed on you. They've had to wonder if they ever really had the control they thought they did, or if it was always borrowed from your kindness, your patience, your effort. That realization is hard to swallow. It forces them to reckon with the truth. They weren't the strong one. They were the one who needed you to feel strong. And without your energy, your reactions, your presence, they're left with themselves. That's why they come back. Not because they've grown, not because they've reflected, but because they don't like who they are without your attention. And when they realize they can no longer evoke the same response, they may try harder. The messages may become more intense, the memories more romanticized, the apologies more poetic. But you see it for what it is, not transformation, but desperation, not redemption, but strategy. And in Stoic relationships, you learn to respond, not to intensity, but to integrity, to choose peace over potential, to choose stability over sparks. Because you know now that the person who truly values you won't play games with your heart just to prove they can win. They won't disappear and reappear based on your emotional availability. They'll show up clearly, consistently, and with respect. And until someone does that, you owe it to yourself to remain where peace lives. That's the kind of control that matters. The control over your own responses, your own healing, your own narrative. Because at the end of the day, real strength isn't about who comes back. It's about who you become when they do. 6. They cannot accept being replaced. There's a quiet fear that lives deep inside people who walk away, believing they'll always be remembered, always be wanted, always be longed for. And it's the fear of being replaced. Not just forgotten, but actively replaced by something, or someone better, healthier, more fulfilling. And for those who built their confidence on your affection, that fear isn't just emotional, it's existential. Because when you finally let go, when you stop checking their updates, when you no longer feel anything when their name pops up, they can feel it in ways that unsettle them more than they expected. They may have thought they were irreplaceable, They may have left thinking your world would quietly collapse and wait for their return, but now they're seeing something else entirely. You're moving on, you're thriving, you're glowing in a peace they never provided. And what hurts them most isn't your happiness, it's the fact that they're no longer part of it. In Stoic relationships, we understand that life is not meant to be spent waiting for those who choose to walk away. We learn that healing is not about making someone else regret leaving. It's about making yourself whole, regardless of their absence. And when you embody that truth, it shakes people, because most don't expect you to move forward without them. They don't expect the version of you that no longer needs closure. They don't expect the evolution that happens when you finally accept the pain and still choose progress. They assumed their presence was a permanent imprint in your life, but now they're witnessing that time doesn't just dull feelings, it replaces them. Slowly, steadily, life fills in the gaps. You meet new people, you laugh again, you rediscover parts of yourself that got lost while you were trying to make someone else stay. And the scariest part for them, you're becoming someone even better without them than you were with them. And that realization is brutal, because it forces them to confront the truth that they weren't your source of joy. They were simply part of a chapter that taught you to find joy within. And now that you've turned the page, they're no longer the center of your story. That's the core of what drives their return. Not love, not clarity, not growth, just fear. Fear that they no longer matter. Fear that someone else might be experiencing the parts of you they took for granted. Fear that your love, which they once treated casually, is now being cherished deeply by someone new. And more than anything, fear that you're okay, truly okay, without them. Because being replaced doesn't just threaten their pride, it threatens their entire perception of importance. They thought they were the plot twist you'd never recover from. But now, they're realizing you were the main character all along, and they were just a supporting role, maybe even a temporary one. And when you replace someone, not out of spite but out of necessity, it's not an act of war, it's an act of wisdom. It says, I've outgrown what hurt me. I've stepped into who I was meant to be. In Stoicism, we are taught to observe pain, to examine its teachings, and to release what no longer serves the present. And you've done that. You no longer romanticize what broke you. You no longer build shrines to the past. You respect what was, but you honor what is. And in doing so, you make room for what's better. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And that clarity is what unsettles them most, because it shows you didn't just survive without them. You became someone who no longer even needs to look back. And that quiet indifference, that peaceful disconnection, it is louder than any goodbye you could have ever said. They're watching you evolve in real time. Maybe they see your new career move. Maybe they hear about your emotional growth. Maybe they see a picture of you smiling, genuinely, freely, unburdened, and it haunts them, not because they still love you, but because your peace means they've lost access. They've lost the ability to affect your mood. They've lost the role they once played as the person you would have done anything for. And when someone's identity is tied to being wanted, seeing that identity fade is devastating. They try to come back not to rebuild, but to confirm that they haven't been fully replaced. They want to feel like they're still unforgettable, like they still hold a sacred place in your memory. But the truth is, you no longer need them to remember who you are. You've reclaimed your story, and their chapter no longer holds the weight it once did. They can't stand the thought that they could be forgotten, that someone else might now be holding your hand, hearing your laugh, feeling your presence, receiving the love they once dismissed. And even if there isn't anyone new, the fact that you've found joy in your own company, that you've stopped lingering in the what-ifs and maybe one-days, is proof enough that they've been replaced, not by a person, but by your own peace. And that's more powerful than any new relationship, because it shows that your happiness is no longer contingent on their validation. You've become your own home, your own safety, your own sense of wholeness. And that level of detachment, that autonomy, it can't be manipulated. It can't be swayed by a sudden message or a wave of nostalgia. You see it for what it is, a reaction to being replaced in a role they assumed was permanent. But roles change, people grow, and in Stoic relationships, growth is sacred. It's the very thing that makes loss bearable. It gives it meaning. It transforms endings into beginnings. It doesn't mean you never loved them. It means you loved yourself enough to let go, to choose healing over history, to embrace what's ahead without being tied to what's behind. And now, as they linger, in the doorway of your new chapter, unsure of how to get in, you remain grounded, not bitter, not vengeful, but certain. Certain of your worth. Certain of your direction. Certain that being replaced isn't a punishment, it's a possibility. It's proof that life doesn't stop when someone leaves. It continues, it expands, it surprises, and you've allowed it to. So let them watch. Let them feel the shift. Let them wrestle with the truth that your world didn't end. It opened, and in that opening you found yourself. And in finding yourself, you wrote the most powerful response to their absence. Joy. If this part of the message touches something in you, if you've ever felt the silent strength of knowing someone can no longer be what they once were in your life, then let's honor that together. Like this video if you feel seen. Drop a #1 in the comments if you've ever realized someone only came back because they couldn't handle being replaced. And make sure you subscribe to stay rooted in your growth, clarity, and unshakable peace. This is what Stoic relationships are built on, not emotional chaos, but inner calm. Let's walk forward together. They always come back when you move on, not because they finally understand your value, but because your growth exposes what they failed to see when it mattered. Your healing becomes the mirror they can't escape, reflecting everything they ignored. Everything they took for granted, everything they thought they could always return to. But what they don't realize is that time doesn't wait, neither does transformation. You are no longer the person who begged for clarity, who stayed in confusion, who questioned your worth through their absence. You've become someone who sits comfortably in silence, who trusts the process of detachment, who knows that peace isn't found in someone's return. It's found in your own refusal to be moved by their reappearance. That's the core of Stoicism. Not emotional numbness, but emotional mastery. Not pushing people away out of fear, but choosing who belongs in your space with deliberate clarity. You no longer flinch when someone exits. You no longer overextend to make them stay. You observe, you assess, you release. Not because you're cold, but because you understand your soul is not a playground for uncertain people. You've built something sacred within yourself, something not everyone deserves access to. And that's not arrogance, that's evolution. So when they come back, and they will, it's not your responsibility to reopen the chapter. It's not your role to become the mirror they need to feel relevant again. You've moved forward, not because you had to, but because you chose to. You chose yourself, your growth, your healing, your stillness. You rewrote the story they assumed would remain unfinished. And now, the page they left you on is no longer the one you live on. You've turned it, you've transcended it. And in that quiet power, in that unshaken confidence, you've found the most profound truth of all. Not everyone who exits deserves re-entry. Some people come back because they lost control, because they need affirmation, because they want to know they still hold space in your heart. But you now hold space for something greater, not their ego, not their return, but your own becoming. And that more than anything is what they never expected, that the pain they caused would become the very soil from which you'd grow into someone who no longer waits to be chosen. Because now, you choose yourself. And that choice changes everything.